My brother-in-law, who married my sister, told my wife that he was in love with her. This led to a chain of horrific discoveries in our family. Before watching the video, I ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write any comment. The most interesting comment will be included in the next videos. Thank you to each of you. Enjoy watching. My name's Alex, 33 years old, male, and my life detonated in the most insane way because of one man, Eric, my brother-in-law. Eric married my sister Megan 8 years ago. They got 2 kids together, a house in the suburbs, the whole perfect family package. Or at least that's what I thought until a few months ago when Eric pulled the most deranged move I've ever experienced. He told my wife, Jenna, that he was in love with her. It still makes my skin crawl to even write that. The guy who married my sister. The guy who I used to drink beers with on the back porch while our kids played in the yard. The guy who called me brother. He decided he was in love with my wife, and instead of keeping that poison locked in his head, he told her. Here's the thing. I didn't find out right away. Jenna told me herself in tears, like she was confessing a crime. She said Eric cornered her in the driveway after one of those chaotic family dinners at Megan's house. He waited until she was strapping our daughter into her car seat, leaned in way too close and whispered, "I married the wrong sister. I should have been with you." When Jenna told me, I swear I felt my body split in half, rage on one side, dread on the other. Because what the hell do you even do with that? She looked terrified, like she thought I wouldn't believe her. But the second she said his name, I knew. I've seen the way Eric looks at her sometimes. Too long, too soft, like he's watching a movie he doesn't want to end. I'd buried it, convinced myself I was imagining it. Turns out my gut had been screaming at me for years. The worst part? I couldn't even explode right away. Jenna begged me not to. She said if I went nuclear too fast, Megan would think she was lying, or worse, think Jenna had led him on. My wife has never been anything but polite around him, but Megan's got this defensive streak when it comes to her husband. She would have taken his side just out of reflex. So there I was, sitting in my living room, fists clenched, listening to my wife cry because she'd been put in the most disgusting, impossible position, and the man responsible was tucking my niece and nephew into bed across town, probably humming some lullaby like he wasn't tearing our family apart from the inside. And that was just the beginning. Because Eric's confession didn't just sit quietly in the dark. It cracked something wide open in my family, and what came spilling out was worse than I ever could have imagined. The first real fracture came in the following weekend. Megan called Jenna out of the blue and invited us over for Sunday dinner. Normally that was routine. My parents would be there, Eric playing grill master, kids running around the backyard. But when Jenna hung up the phone, her hands were shaking. She didn't want to go. I didn't either. But Jenna said if we refused, Megan would smell something was off. "We need to act normal," she whispered, like we were plotting an undercover mission, instead of just going to eat overcooked steaks at my sister's house. From the moment we walked in, Eric's eyes were on her. Not just casual glances. Hungry. Jenna kept her head down, focused on the kids, but I saw it. Every time she laughed at something my dad said, Eric was watching like it belonged to him. I sat there gripping my beer so tight the glass nearly shattered. And Megan? She was oblivious. Or maybe she wasn't. That's the part that still messes with me. She was buzzing around the kitchen, snapping at the kids, bragging about some promotion at work. But every now and then she'd touch Eric's arm, like staking her claim. It felt almost performative. Like she knew there was a threat and was marking territory. I barely made it through the meal. When we finally got in the car, Jenna broke down. Said Eric had brushed past her in the kitchen, close enough his hand grazed her hip. She said she froze, terrified to make a scene in front of everyone. My blood went white hot. That night I called Eric straight up. No small talk, just, if you ever touch my wife again, I will bury you. I expected him to back down, deny something. But he laughed. Then he said, "She's not denying there's something between us. Why are you?" I nearly drove to his house right then, but Jenna begged me not to. Said if I showed up screaming, it would turn into a she said circus. And Megan would never believe her. The thing is, Megan called me the next day anyway. Her voice was clipped, suspicious. She asked why Jenna looked uncomfortable at dinner. Asked if we were having marital problems. And that's when it hit me. Eric hadn't kept his mouth shut. He'd been planting seeds. I lied. Told Megan everything was fine. But the way she said, before hanging up chilled me, because it sounded less like concern and more like she'd already chosen her side. And if I'd known what was coming next, I would have realized then I wasn't just fighting Eric. I was about to be at war with my own sister. The shift started small, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Megan suddenly stopped calling Jenna over their usual stuff. Recipes, kid advice, those sister-to-sister chats they always had. She started calling me instead. About nonsense. Ask if I'd talked to Mom about Thanksgiving plans, if I knew a good plumber, if I could remind Jenna about some PTA form. At first I thought she was just being practical. Then it clicked. She was cutting Jenna out. Meanwhile, Eric wasn't slowing down. In fact, he was getting bolder. A week after that disastrous dinner, Jenna was at the grocery store with our daughter when Eric just happened to show up. He texted her after, saying he'd followed her down the aisles because he couldn't stand being apart. She showed me the texts. Pages of them, all rambling about how he'd been living a lie with Megan and how Jenna was his real soulmate. I wanted to march over and smash his phone into his face. But again, Jenna begged me not to. She was terrified of what would happen if Megan found out. And here's the sick part. I think Eric wanted her to find out. 2 days later, my phone lit up with Megan's name. Her voice was icy. "Did you know Jenna's been flirting with Eric?" My heart dropped. He'd twisted it. He'd gone to her first. I kept my cool, said, "Absolutely not. Eric's crossing lines and Jenna told me everything." Silence. Then Megan hissed, "So you're taking her side over your own sister?" That was the moment I realized Megan wasn't a victim here. She wasn't blindsided. She was in denial. Or worse, she was enabling him because facing the truth would mean admitting her marriage was rotten. After that, things spiraled. Megan stopped bringing the kids over to our house. She forgot to invite Jenna to a family lunch with our parents. And Eric. Eric went full unhinged. One night around midnight, I heard a noise outside. Looked out the window and saw him standing across the street, just staring at our house. Hands in his pockets like some creep out of a horror movie. I stormed out, ready to end it right there, but by the time I hit the driveway, he was gone. The next morning, there was a note on Jenna's windshield. Just 5 words. "You can't hide forever." That was the point where fear replaced anger. Jenna didn't want to leave the house alone. Our daughter had nightmares because she saw me arguing with Uncle Eric through the window. And me? I was starting to wonder if this wasn't just obsession, if maybe Eric was capable of something worse, and the most horrifying part, my sister still refused to see it. That Sunday hammered everything into the open. Megan had organized a kids' end of summer barbecue on her lawn, the kind of staged perfection where the sprinklers are set just so and the paper plates match the napkins. I hated going, but Jenna wanted the kids to see their cousins, I told myself I could swallow it for one afternoon. I was wrong. Eric wasn't hiding anymore. He arrived late, hands shoved in his pockets like he owned the place, and within 20 minutes he'd found Jenna by the folding table where the kids were decorating cupcakes. He didn't speak quietly. He stepped into her space like a man claiming territory, and in front of my sister and our parents and half the neighborhood, told Jenna he loved her. Not some whisper that might be dismissed. He said it like a verdict. Time did the weird thing it does when your brain can't accept what's happening. It slowed and sped up at once. I remember the exact sound of the sprinkler spitting water, the sticky sweetness of a dropped cupcake on the grass, the way my daughter's laughter cut off. My sister went pale and immediately moved between them. But she didn't yell. She clutched Eric's sleeve like she was holding onto the last thing that kept her life making sense. I walked over, chest a drum of fury, and tried to yank Eric away. He shoved me. It wasn't hard, just enough to send me into the picnic table, but it was deliberate, theatrical. I grabbed his arm back. He shoved me harder. Then Megan shouted for him to stop, like she was demanding the whole world to keep pretending nothing had happened. That's when Eric snapped. He grabbed the wooden frame from the table, one of those big family portraits Megan had brought, and hurled it face first into the lawn. Glass shattered across the picnic blanket. The portrait of Megan and Eric on their wedding day exploded into confetti of memory. The kids screamed. My mother started crying. My father muttered nonsense about decency. Eric screamed that he'd been buried alive in a life he didn't choose, and that Jenna and I were the ones living in cowardice. People called out for him to leave. He laughed and kicked my truck's tires so hard the rim dented. Police arrived because someone called. My sister's neighbor, I later found out. Eric fled before they got out of their cars, but not before I swore I had him on video. Jenna handed me her phone, the same one where she'd saved the text in the small, terrible recording from the driveway the other night, his voice low and ugly, telling her everything she hadn't asked for. My hands were shaking when I hit play. That night, while Megan sobbed and pretended to stabilize the kids, I made a decision that felt like unwrapping a loaded present. I would not let this be a private family scandal that got gaslit into nothing. I started copying every text, every voicemail, every little thing Jenna had saved. I backed up the videos to my laptop and labeled the files with dates. I didn't go to the cops yet. Jenna was still scared of the fallout, but I began the quieter kind of warfare, documentation, witnesses, and theater. Sweet revenge wasn't going to be explosive violence. It would be exposure on terms Eric couldn't control. I wanted him stripped down to the ugly script he'd written, seen by Megan, seen by the people who mattered in his life, seen everywhere he ever tried to pretend he was a victim. The first move was simple. I uploaded his mid-driveway confession to a private folder and sent a single cryptic text to his work email from an anonymous number. Check your personal things at home. You'll want them. Then I burned the audio onto a CD, old school because who expects it, and slid it into an envelope with a note, "For Megan. Listen before anyone tells you otherwise." I left it on her porch at 3 a.m., backlit by street lamps and cold with the hush of someone who decided enough was enough. Update. Okay, for anyone who DM'd after the last post, yes, I know this is dramatic. Some people told me to call the cops first. I did later. Others said to go nuclear on social media. Not yet. Someone joked, "Bro, retro CD energy." Fair. A couple of you suggested getting a lawyer before doing anything. Good call, already scheduled. Also, shout out to the friend who texted me at 2 a.m. Play it loud at the next family dinner. Tempting, honestly. The porch drop was me testing the waters. Will Megan listen if she isn't filtered through Eric first? Some people said I should have handed everything straight to Megan. Trust me. I weighed that, and she needed to hear it without him framing it. Next, I'll tell you what happened the morning she found the CD and why that single moment changed every quiet assumption I had about my sister. She found the CD at dawn, still in its cheap paper sleeve, tucked under a potted fern on her porch. I'd left it there because I wanted her to hear it without him filtering a single word. I wanted the first thing she heard about what Eric had been doing to come from the man who engineered it, not the man who'd been covering for him. Megan called me 2 minutes after she pressed play. At first she was all clipped questions. Who the hell put this here? Then the voice in the recording cut into the line. Eric, low and unfiltered, telling Jenna exactly what he'd told her in the driveway, only longer, angrier, and with that breathy laugh he'd use when he thought he was being romantic. He said the same stupid, dangerous things. He married the wrong sister. He couldn't help it. He had always known. But on the recording he also admitted detail after detail that Jenna hadn't told me. Little things Eric had described as private that proved a pattern. It was like watching someone confess to a crime with the lights on. Megan went quiet, and then she started to breathe like someone surfacing. I could hear dishes clinking in the background, kids getting cereal. Then a sob came that didn't sound performative. It sounded raw. I don't know what to do, she whispered. And she broke off. I drove over because there was no way I was leaving her alone in that spiral. When I got there, the first thing I saw was the wedding portrait still face down in the yard, its frame splintered where Eric had thrown it. Megan was in the kitchen, hair scraped into a tight knot, listening to the recording again and again, like she was probing the edges of her own memory to see if anything fit. She hugged me like I was an anchor. We tried to talk to Eric first, calmly, because I still wanted to give her a chance to step into reality without humiliation. He answered the door shirtless, breathless, and angry. He lied quickly, said the tape was out of context, said Jenna had flirted with him for years, and he'd only said something in the moment. Megan made the mistake of asking questions. He lost it. What followed was textbook meltdown, screaming, tears that looked rehearsed at some points and real at others, him slamming his palm against the wall until there was a dent, him grabbing his phone and waving it like proof, and then, most destabilizing, him calling the kids into the room and telling them to stay with Daddy. He weaponized the little ones in a second, talking to them in that sing-song voice about family secrets and grown-up mistakes. My stomach turned. It was showmanship, and it was dangerous. When I moved to take the kids away, because I wasn't going to let them be used as props, Eric lunged. He shoved me hard enough to shove my shoulder into the pantry. A stack of Tupperware rained down. Megan screamed, which I still think saved us. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Someone's phone started recording. Eric, realizing witnesses existed, staggered to his truck and tore out of the driveway while Megan collapsed, sobbing on the kitchen floor. That night he retaliated in the ugly physical way you see in movies. Slashed Jenna's tires with a pocket knife and vandalized the side of her car with the words liar and whore. Brilliant, classic, pathetic. He left a smashed picture frame on our porch like a signature. My daughter found it and wouldn't sleep for 2 nights. Here's where the revenge arc kicks in, where things stop being about righteous anger and become surgical. I didn't want to hurt Eric with violence. I wanted him stripped of the theater he depended on. Respect, work, the neighbor's pity, the myth of a stable dad. So I did the slow, humiliating things he couldn't punch out of existence. First, I put everything, texts, the driveway confession, the voicemail where he admitted specific things, into the hands of people who mattered to him. I emailed his boss with a short subject line and 3 attachments. I sat in my lawyer's office and described in blunt terms the pattern of harassment and the property damage. A restraining order was filed that night. I uploaded the audio to a private cloud and shared the link with Megan's closest friends and with our parents, with a note, "Listen, then decide." I printed the video stills of him standing outside our house like a stalker and slid them into an envelope addressed to the neighborhood HOA and the mom's group, where he'd cultivated his good neighbor image. It was slow. Emails, copies to HR, quiet phone calls, witnesses agreeing to back statements. It was also public, because Eric thrived in the gray. I posted a short factual timeline in a private community group, where many of his colleagues were members. I didn't scream names in front of his kids. I didn't engage in petty social media smear campaigns. I used evidence, cadence, and leverage. By the time he came back screaming at 2 a.m., demanding to know who had turned on him, his employer had called and an HR rep had an inbox full of audio. The neighbors had the porch camera footage. Megan's friends had the CD. His white picket fence story unraveled while he was still yelling. That night ended with police paperwork and a temporary order keeping him away from our address. He screamed about betrayal. He screamed about me ruining his reputation. He smashed a mailbox in a different neighborhood to prove he could still win. He painted himself victim in group texts. I didn't retaliate physically. My revenge was quieter, crueler to his ego. I exposed him to the very communities he used to perform in, the work crew that respected his humor, the PTA parents who trusted his smile, the company email list where he'd posed as steady. The humiliation and was antiseptic and scientific. It took weeks for it to bloom. An HR inquiry, a suspended driver's license for a reckless episode. Someone had the video. A neighbor who refused him handyman work. And finally, what mattered most, Megan refusing to go home the night after the vandalism. She packed a bag for the kids. Sweet revenge for me wasn't glory. It was removing his stage. He could rage and cry and be dramatic till his chest split, but there was nowhere left for the performance to land. He lost the safe rooms where his confessions could be turned into romance, and watching that slow, inevitable collapse, that's what felt like justice. The week after the restraining order felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Eric didn't calm down. He metamorphosed. He went from performative lover to desperate saboteur, and whatever mild rules the neighborhood had about don't make scenes evaporated overnight. First there were the little invasions. Doorbell cams that caught him pacing outside our house at 4 a.m., a package on our porch that turned out to be pornographic junk addressed to Jenna, and a voicemail for our daughter that someone, later traced to a burner phone, left with a deadpan, "Tell your mom to come back or Daddy's gonna make life hard." My stomach turned every time my phone buzzed. Jenna stopped walking Belle to school. I quit going to late-night jobs alone. Fear rewired everything. Then Eric went louder. He showed up at our daughter's school one morning, storming into the office, red-faced and shouting about dangerous people and unstable adults who were coming between him and the kids. He tried to spin the narrative, zobbing at the principal's desk, accusing Jenna of manipulating witnesses. I've never hated sound the way I hated his crocodile tears. The school called me. They handed me a printout. Eric had filed for emergency custody. He'd gone to the courthouse and filled out paperwork accusing Megan and me of alienation tactics. The paper was clinical, sterile, and poisonous. My lawyer told me we could beat it. Evidence, timelines, witnesses. But watching a man weaponize kids in legal forms to keep a performance alive is a savage kind of pain. And then he struck where he knew it would hurt me. My work. One morning I showed up to find my truck's window smashed and my toolbox rifled through. Someone broke into the storage shed on my property and slashed the tarps on machines I'd been saving for months. It smelled like escalation. I can ruin the parts of you that provide. I filed police reports until my fingers cramped. That's when I doubled down on the quiet surgical revenge I'd started. If Eric wanted spectacle, I give him an audience that mattered and make sure every seat in it was filled by people whose opinion could actually cost him things. Update. Okay, quick sidebar. To the people who DM'd saying burn him on social or go beat his ass, I read every message. Some of you were brutal, some of you were brilliant. A handful suggested a public takedown, others warned of legal blowback. I hired the lawyer, I called the parents in the PTA group. I'd already gotten a lot of evidence. Y'all reminded me to be precise and not emotional in court language. Shout out to the person who said, make sure your daughter isn't the weapon. You were right. I kept her out of it. What I did next was small and perfect. I arranged a morning meeting at the community center. Neighborhood safety and school volunteers. I invited the principal, the PTA president, our HOA, and Eric's supervisor. Quietly through an email I sent with a short subject line, urgent personnel concern. I made sure Megan's friends were there. I made sure witnesses who had seen him outside our house and at the school could come. I didn't advertise revenge. I called it accountability. When the meeting started, I let the principal speak about safety protocols. Then calmly, I handed my laptop to the PTA lead and asked if they could play some audio I'd been asked to archive. I felt gut-level sick as the first recording, Eric in our driveway, the same words, the same laugh, filled the small room. Heads turned. Phones came out, not to record, but to call people who should have known. His supervisor's face went grave. The PTA president whispered something into a phone and then asked the meeting to pause while she called HR. That afternoon, the repercussions began to ripple. His employer put him on leave pending investigation. The school filed formal harassment complaints. A neighbor who'd been half sympathetic told him he needed help and couldn't be around the kids until things were sorted. For the first time, the world Eric had curated, work, neighborly respect, the good dad image, developed a leak he couldn't tape over with theatrics. It wasn't gladiatorial. There was no viral post with 1 million comments. It was quieter. Documents filed, calls made, a cluster of people who mattered refusing to play his role any longer. Watching him try to claw his reputation back in the coming days was something dark and oddly satisfying. The man who weaponized charm suddenly had nowhere safe to land, but he didn't give up. He got meaner, more erratic. And the worst part? He started dragging other people into his orbit of chaos. Old friends who'd cover for him, a cousin who showed up and tried to intimidate Megan. That set the stage for the part where things get truly unhinged, and where my revenge shifts from exposure to something a little sweeter and more personal, reclaiming the things he'd tried to steal, our peace, Megan's autonomy, my family's sense of safety. The next week felt like walking through a war zone that Eric was designing to look like normal life. He kept inventing chaos and handing it to other people to light. Cousins who showed up at Megan's house wearing the same "I got your back" sneer. A neighbor who decided to post passive-aggressive flyers about neighborhood safety with a blurry screenshot of our porch cam. And a coworker of his who texted Jenna pictures of a beer bottle with a lipstick ring, clearly staged. He was trying to flood the board with noise so the real stuff would drown. What he didn't know was that noise is its own fingerprint. Patterns repeat. People slip. and I'd spent the last month turning his slips into a file that would read like the most damning boring thing a man like him could fear. Paper trail, witnesses, official actions. My lawyer called it depriving him of plausible narrative. I called it getting him out of the theater he'd been hiding in. Megan finally did something decisive. She filed for separation and asked for full temporary custody. That one act felt monumental. For weeks I'd watched her wobble between denial and rage. The day she signed the papers, she looked like she'd taken back a piece of herself. She'd been somewhere letting him borrow. She hugged me and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I told her to save apologies for later and keep the kids close tonight. Eric didn't take the legal hit quietly. He escalated into the small, cruel things again. Late night pounding on our door, a brick through the mailbox at Megan's, another set of tires slashed. Only this time the physical attacks built the very narrative that would finish him. He drove by Jenna's workplace until his car was photographed. He texted the kids on burner numbers after the court filing, and he stooped to showing up at the hardware store where I pick up parts, banging on display items and shouting about protecting family. One of his cousins, Tony, tried to shove a neighborhood mom who testified against him. She fell hard on the pavement and scraped her palms. Tony's phone call to Eric was full of breathless anger. Eric answered like a maestro. I stopped being reactive and got surgical. The HOA meeting I'd set up turned into a summit. I brought the principal, the HR rep, my lawyer, the PTA head, and 2 neighbors with porch camera footage. I brought the woman Tony shoved. I slipped copies of the restraining order, the time stamps, the photographs of vandalism, and the audio clips into a folder and handed one to each person. I didn't theatrically play the audio. This wasn't the stage he wanted, because the evidence alone, collated and certified, was a statistical argument no one could charm away. That evening, while Eric was busy at his truck, a neighbor flagged down his supervisor. Someone I had quietly texted the day before with a link and a note that read, "You should probably listen before HR calls." The supervisor's face went the color of bad coffee. They didn't fire him on the spot. HR put him on unpaid suspension pending investigation, but the ripple was immediate. Contractors who'd hired him for weekend jobs canceled. The man who'd relied on being one of the good dads at the soccer field lost the calls to set up charity gigs. Eric's last act of stupidity was the one that finally turned his volatility into legal consequences. He came to Megan's house the night she packed a bag. He banged on the door, screaming about betrayal. Tony and 2 other cousins circled the driveway like bad omens. Megan locked herself and the kids in the bedroom and called me. I drove over with the neighbor who'd recorded Tony's shove. The cousins started to leave when they saw the neighbor and the police pull into the street. Eric didn't. He walked up the path, shoved at the door, and when officers arrived, he violated the temporary order by following the officers' instructions 6 times, stepping into the protected radius, shouting, refusing to disperse. That violation is what finally did him in. He was handcuffed in front of the splintered wedding portrait and the smashed picture frames he'd left as calling cards. The kids cried as an officer put him in the back of a squad car, and for once it wasn't his hysterics that dominated the scene. It was quiet relief. There was no cinematic rope-a-dope, no glorious public shaming where he blubbered on a stage. The sweet part of it came later in small increments. Neighbors no longer waved back. Weekend jobs dried up. An HR file grew thick enough that his job was in jeopardy, and the village of people he'd counted on for sympathy were reading court documents and thinking maybe we were wrong about him. Megan moved into my spare room with the kids for a few nights. She slept with her phone on her chest and the court documents in a drawer. We taped the shattered wedding portrait to the wall in our garage. like evidence and a talisman, until she could decide what to do with it. At night, I'd find myself staring at the splintered faces in that photo and thinking about how small, cruel acts add up. Eric had used charm and tantrums to build his safety net. We'd methodically cut away at the ropes until nothing but his own actions remained. That more than any dramatic confrontation felt like vengeance, precise, irreversible, and undeniably just. Eric's arrest didn't magically fix everything, but it did shift the gravity in the room. For the first time, the threat wasn't just hanging above our heads like smoke. It was contained, documented, sitting in a holding cell while someone else read his file instead of his Facebook posts. Megan stayed with me and Jenna for a few weeks, the kids bundled into spare bedrooms, their backpacks piled by the couch. Nights were still restless. Any noise outside made Bella jump, and Megan kept checking the locks 3-4 times before bed. But the screaming, the surprise door pounding, it stopped. Silence felt like a gift. Court dates stacked up like bricks. Megan filed for divorce, with the restraining order upgraded to cover her and the kids indefinitely. Eric tried theatrics in the hearings, crying about betrayal, accusing us of poisoning his marriage, but the judge wasn't buying it anymore. Every time his lawyer opened his mouth, there were printouts, recordings, neighbors ready to testify. His performance, once magnetic, now came off as pathetic. By the third hearing, he was warned that any more outbursts would land him in contempt. Revenge came in waves, quiet but cutting. His employer didn't just suspend him, they fired him when the harassment complaints hit HR's desk in bulk. Megan's lawyer petitioned for child support based on his past income, a debt he couldn't crawl out from under without so steady work. Word spread fast in our town. The good dad image was shredded. Parents crossed the street to avoid him, and at one soccer practice, another dad told him point blank to get the hell off the field before the cops got called again. Eric's own cousins, the ones who'd circled Megan's driveway like vultures, started ghosting his calls. It turns out not many people are eager to tie themselves to a sinking ship. One night, Megan and I pulled that broken wedding portrait, the one Eric had smashed in his rage, out of the garage. She took the frame apart, pried the photo loose, and slid it through the shredder strip by strip until all that was left was a pile of curling paper ribbons. No yelling, no tears. Just a quiet dismantling of the symbol he'd tried to hold over her. "He doesn't own my story anymore," she said. That moment felt sweeter than any courtroom win. Jenna held me later and whispered that she finally felt safe again. Megan, exhausted but lighter, started laughing at small things. The kids' cartoons, a stupid joke I made. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was the start of something steadier. Something Eric couldn't sabotage. The revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was survival, documented and undeniable, stripping him of every mask until he stood bare and unconvincing in front of the very people he once manipulated. And for the first time in months, I slept without waking at every sound, because Eric's chaos wasn't ours to carry anymore. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and like it. You can also watch more shocking stories in the playlist.